You are on crazy HOA moments. I walked into the management lobby with proof. You have 5 minutes to fix this. That was the first thing Evelyn Reed yelled at me in the driveway, waving a printed notice with my address on it and a violation code I had never seen before. She claimed I stole a travel bag from a car in the guest lot 2 nights ago, and she had video proof. I asked to see it. She refused and told me the Lakeview Heights Homeowners Association policy required immediate punishment. I am a paramedic in Fresno, California, and I work long shifts, so the last thing I need is an HOA war over something I did not do. But Evelyn was not interested in facts. She was interested in control. She said if I did not admit fault and pay the fine by the end of the day, she would have private security confront me publicly at the clubhouse event that evening. The event was a charity fundraiser starting in 1 hour, and half the neighborhood would be there. I asked for a copy of the rule she kept citing. She stepped closer and said if I demanded documentation, she would add another fine for obstruction. That was the trigger. I realized she was not enforcing a rule. She was making one up to trap me. I pulled out my phone and opened my Doorbell camera app. I told her I had footage from that night showing my car never left the driveway. She cut me off and said the HOA policy prohibited using personal recordings as evidence without board approval. I said that made no sense. She said I have witnesses, and if I fought her, she would make it worse. That was her boomerang line, and I filed it away for later. Evelyn worked as the neighborhood communications lead, which meant she managed the email list, posted notices, and coordinated vendors. She had no legal authority, but she acted like she ran the place. She wore a cheap laminated badge on a lanyard that said Communications Committee in block letters. She carried a portable thermal printer in a shoulder bag so she could print violation notices on the spot. It was pure theater, but it worked because most people just paid the fines to avoid the hassle. I told her I was not paying anything until I saw the video. She pulled out her phone, pointed it at me, and said she was documenting my refusal. Then she turned and walked toward the mailbox cluster at the end of the block, where a small crowd was already gathering to pick up packages before the charity event. I followed her because I knew she was about to make a scene, and I needed witnesses of my own. The mailbox cluster sat in a shaded alcove near the entrance to the neighborhood. It was the social hub where people ran into each other and gossiped. Evelyn loved it because it gave her an audience. When we arrived, she raised her voice and announced that I was under investigation for theft. She said the HOA had received multiple complaints about missing items from cars, and I had been seen near the vehicles at night. A few neighbors turned to stare. I felt my face get hot, but I kept my mouth shut and pulled out my phone again. Evelyn pulled a photo from her bag and held it up. It showed a small storage bin with a Lakeview Heights label sitting in a restricted area behind the clubhouse. She said this was proof I had accessed the area illegally and used it to stash stolen goods. I had never been in that area. I asked her how a photo of an empty bin proved I stole anything. She ignored me and said the bin had been moved recently and my access card was logged in the system. I said I wanted to see the log. She said the log was confidential and only available during a formal hearing. That was the first goalpost move. She was inventing procedures to keep me from defending myself. I asked when the hearing would be. She said it depended on my cooperation. I asked what cooperation meant. She said I needed to hand over my camera footage and submit to a search of my vehicle. I refused. She said that refusal would be noted in my file, and the fine would increase. One of the neighbors, a mailroom worker named Greg, spoke up. He said he had noticed a pattern of complaints being filed in batches, and he thought it was weird because they all had the same template and printed names with no handwritten signatures. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of 2 identical complaint forms he had seen in the office. The forms were laid side by side, and the formatting was identical down to the spacing. That was the first clue. Evelyn saw Greg talking to me and walked over. She told him he was violating privacy policies by discussing internal documents. Greg shrugged and said he was just making an observation. Evelyn turned back to me and said she was escalating the matter. She demanded I hand over my camera footage and threatened additional fines if I refused. I said no. She pulled out her phone and called someone. She said she was contacting the tow vendor and requesting immediate action without formal paperwork. I heard her say my address and describe my car. She said the vehicle was parked in violation of guest lot rules and needed to be removed within the hour. I pointed out my car was in my own driveway, not the guest lot. She said the rule applied to all vehicles associated with an active investigation. That was the vendor pressure move. She was using a tow company like her personal enforcement arm. I walked back to my driveway and moved my car to the street, then took photos of the new location with timestamps. I knew she would try to claim I moved it after the tow order, so I documented everything. Then I called the management office and asked for a copy of the guest lot parking rule. The woman on the phone said she would email it to me, but it might take a few days because they were short-staffed. I said I needed it today. She said she would try. I went back to the mailbox cluster because I knew Evelyn would still be there working the crowd. When I arrived, she was talking to a deputy who had just pulled up in a patrol car. She waved me over and said she wanted to file a report. The deputy asked what happened. Evelyn said I had trespassed in the clubhouse storage area and stolen items from the charity cash box. She said she had witnesses and documentation. The deputy looked at me and asked for my side. I said I had never been in the storage area, and I had doorbell footage proving I was home the night she claimed the theft happened. Evelyn interrupted and said I was lying. She pointed at a camera mounted on the clubhouse roof and said it captured everything. The deputy asked to see the footage. Evelyn hesitated, then said the footage was stored on a server and required a formal request. The deputy asked how long that would take. She said at least a week. The deputy looked skeptical. He told Evelyn he could not take a report without evidence, and he suggested she work it out through the HOA process. Evelyn looked furious. She said the HOA policy allowed her to issue immediate penalties, and she did not need police involvement. The deputy raised an eyebrow and said that was not how it worked. The deputy left, and Evelyn turned on me. She said if I did not comply by the end of the day, she would file a formal complaint with the board and recommend suspension of my access to all common areas. That meant no mail delivery, no pool, no clubhouse. I said that was illegal. She said it was in the bylaws. I asked where. She said she did not have to explain it to me. She pulled out her thermal printer and printed a new notice on the spot. She handed it to me and said I had until 6 p.m. to respond. The charity event started at 5:30. If you are enjoying this story, smash that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. I went home and pulled up my doorbell footage from the night of the alleged theft. The video showed my car sitting in the driveway from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. the next morning. No movement, no one approached my car. I saved the file to a USB drive and added a copy to my phone. Then I opened my email and found a message from the management office. They had sent me a PDF of the guest lot parking rule, and it said nothing about investigations or vehicle holds. The rule only applied to cars parked in the guest lot for more than 72 hours. My car had been in my own driveway the entire time. I forwarded the email to Greg and asked him to keep a copy. He replied and said he had been reviewing the complaint log, and he noticed something strange. The same device uploaded multiple complaint forms minutes apart on the same day. The metadata showed the forms were created on Evelyn's admin account, then backdated to make it look like they came in over several weeks. That was the twist. Evelyn was not just enforcing bad rules. She was fabricating complaints to justify her enforcement. I called Greg and asked if he could print the log. He said he would, but he warned me that Evelyn would know someone accessed the system. I told him to do it anyway. I needed proof, and I needed it before the event started. He said he would meet me at the clubhouse in 20 minutes. I grabbed my USB drive, my phone, and a binder I used for work documents. I knew this was going to be a public fight, and I wanted to look prepared. When I arrived at the clubhouse, the parking lot was full. People were setting up tables for the fundraiser, and a catering truck was unloading trays of food. Evelyn was standing near the entrance holding a clipboard with a stack of printed forms. She saw me and walked over. She said I was not allowed on the property until the investigation was resolved. I said the parking lot was common area and I had every right to be there. She said she would call security. I said go ahead. Greg arrived with a folder full of printouts. He handed it to me and said the log showed 15 complaints filed in one 5-minute window, all from Evelyn's account. He also found a records request response that included 2 different versions of the same board meeting minutes. One version mentioned a vote to suspend enforcement during the transition period. The other version did not mention the vote at all. That was the second clue. Evelyn had been editing official records to support her narrative. I opened my binder and added Greg's printouts. Then I walked to the clubhouse entrance and asked to speak to the event coordinator. A woman in a staff polo came out and asked what I needed. I said I wanted to report a discrepancy in the HOA records and show her evidence of falsified complaints. She looked uncomfortable and said she was not authorized to handle that. I asked who was. She said the property manager, but he was off-site. I asked for his number. She hesitated, then gave me a business card. Evelyn saw me talking to the staff and came over. She told the coordinator I was banned from the property. The coordinator looked confused and asked for documentation. Evelyn said it was verbal. The coordinator said she needed something in writing. Evelyn pulled out her thermal printer and printed a notice on the spot. She handed it to the coordinator and said it was official. The coordinator read it and said she still needed approval from the property manager. Evelyn's face turned red. She said the policy allowed her to act without approval in emergency situations. The coordinator said this did not look like an emergency. I called the property manager and explained the situation. He said he was aware of concerns about Evelyn's enforcement methods and he had been waiting for someone to file a formal complaint. I said I had evidence of falsified records and metadata showing she backdated complaints. He asked me to email everything to him immediately. I said I would, but I also wanted to address it at the event because Evelyn had already tried to ban me publicly. He said he could not stop me from attending a public event, and if Evelyn continued to harass me, he would intervene. I hung up and walked into the clubhouse. Evelyn followed me and started yelling that I was trespassing. A crowd of neighbors turned to watch. I stayed calm and said I had documentation proving the complaints against me were fabricated. I opened my binder and pulled out the metadata log. I held it up and said the same device uploaded 15 complaints in 5 minutes, all from Evelyn's admin account. Evelyn said I was lying. I pulled out my phone and showed the screen to the crowd. The log was clear. Evelyn's face went pale. A community volunteer named Linda spoke up. She said she had noticed the cash box process was sloppy and money had gone missing after the last event. She said she reported it to Evelyn, but Evelyn told her it was a clerical error. Linda said she did not believe that and she thought someone on the committee was skimming. The room went quiet. Evelyn said Linda was spreading rumors. Linda said she had a receipt that did not match the deposit slip and she kept it in case anyone asked. That was the third clue. I asked Linda if she still had the receipt. She pulled it out of her purse and handed it to me. The receipt showed a cash donation of $200. The deposit slip showed $150. Evelyn said the difference was explained in the notes. Linda said there were no notes. Evelyn said Linda was confused. Linda said she was not confused, and she wanted an audit. The property manager arrived and asked what was going on. I handed him the binder with the metadata log, the duplicate complaint forms, the mismatched receipt, and my doorbell footage. He flipped through the pages and said he needed to review everything, but it looked serious. He asked Evelyn to step outside. She refused and said she had nothing to hide. He said if she did not step outside, he would call the police and file a report for records tampering. Evelyn looked around the room and saw that no one was on her side. She grabbed her bag and walked out. The property manager told everyone the event would continue, but the HOA would be conducting an internal review. He said anyone with evidence of misconduct should contact him directly. Then he pulled me aside and asked for copies of everything I had. I handed him the USB drive and said I also had the original files on my phone. He thanked me and said he would follow up within 48 hours. The next day, the property manager called and said Evelyn had been suspended from the communications committee pending the outcome of the review. He said the board had voted to freeze all enforcement actions initiated by her, and anyone who paid fines based on her notices would receive a refund. He also said the tow vendor confirmed that Evelyn had called them multiple times requesting emergency tows without proper authorization, and they were terminating their contract with the HOA because of liability concerns. That was the vendor consequence. 2 weeks later, the property manager sent an email to the entire neighborhood. The email included a summary of the review findings. Evelyn had fabricated at least 20 complaints over 6 months, backdated records to create false timelines, and stolen approximately $800 from the charity cash box by skimming donations and blaming clerical errors. The email also said Evelyn had used her admin access to delete portal uploads, including my original records request. The audit log showed her account deleting the file the same day I submitted it. That was the funny karma beat. Evelyn had insisted the portal never got my upload, and the audit log proved she was the one who deleted it. The board scheduled a special meeting to address the findings. I attended and brought Greg and Linda as witnesses. The meeting was packed. The board president opened by reading the review summary and apologizing to everyone who had been targeted by Evelyn's enforcement campaign. He said the board took full responsibility for failing to provide oversight, and they were implementing new controls to prevent future abuse. Then he asked if anyone wanted to speak. I stood up and said I wanted the board to issue a formal apology and provide written confirmation that all charges against me were dropped. I also said I wanted the HOA to cover the cost of my attorney consultation, which I had started before the review was completed. The board president agreed to both requests. Then, Linda stood up and asked what was happening with the stolen money. The board president said they had referred the matter to local law enforcement, and a detective was assigned to the case. Evelyn was not at the meeting. The board president said she had resigned from the committee and was no longer involved in HOA operations. He said the board could not comment further because of the ongoing investigation, but he confirmed that Evelyn would not be returning to any leadership role. 3 weeks later, I received a written reversal from management with a real citation number and an apology letter from the board president. The letter confirmed that the HOA would refund all charges related to Evelyn's complaints and place a hold on further fees pending the completion of the review process. That was the payback vector. The same week, I saw Evelyn in the mailbox cluster. She was picking up her mail and avoiding eye contact with everyone. When she saw me, she turned and walked away without saying a word. A neighbor told me later that Evelyn had moved out of the neighborhood entirely. That was Karen's consequence. She had stormed out when the room turned against her, and now she was gone. The final humiliation moment happened a month later. The detective called and asked me to come to the clubhouse for a follow-up. When I arrived, a small crowd had gathered near the storage area. The detective was standing next to a stash container that had been opened. Inside were envelopes, a small travel bag, and several items reported missing from cars over the previous months. The detective said the container had been locked with a key that matched Evelyn's access ring, and security footage showed her entering the area multiple times after hours. The detective asked if I recognized any of the items. I pointed to the travel bag and said it matched the description from the original theft report. The detective nodded and said Evelyn would be charged with theft and records tampering. Karen could not explain the stash, and everyone saw it. The HOA board held another meeting and announced that the association would be implementing new oversight procedures, including quarterly audits and a requirement for all enforcement actions to be reviewed by the property manager before taking effect. The board also said they were replacing the communications committee with a new volunteer group that would report directly to the board. The announcement included a public acknowledgement that the previous system had failed, and the board committed to rebuilding trust with the community. I got my refund, my access was fully restored, and the board issued a formal statement clearing me of all accusations. The HOA's outcome was that they had to produce records, implement oversight, and replace the committee leadership. My ability to receive deliveries was no longer at risk because Evelyn was no longer interfering with my packages or my access to the mailbox cluster. The legal process moved forward, and I was told I might be called as a witness if the case went to trial. I did not care about revenge beyond what I had already achieved. I just wanted my life back, and I got it. Greg and Linda became friends, and we started a small group of neighbors who attend board meetings and ask questions. The HOA is not perfect, but it is better than it was. The new communications lead is a retired teacher who actually answers emails and does not print notices in parking lots. The charity fundraiser happened again the following year, and this time the cash box had 2 counters and a locked bag that went straight to the bank. No one skimmed, and no one got framed. I still check my doorbell camera every morning, and I keep my records organized in case anything happens again. But so far, the neighborhood has been quiet. Evelyn is gone, the board is more careful, and people are not afraid to speak up when something feels wrong. That is the best outcome I could have asked for. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.